My dad was the kindest park ranger you'd ever meet. Instead of handing over orphan predators to a zoo, he'd raise them himself and release them back into the wild. The animals he raised would often swing by with their own families after they grew up. He'd get all proud, saying how everything has a spirit and that we should keep doing good deeds. Then someone told him, those animals were just bringing their kids to check on their future food supply. Not only that, they hoped Dad, their bait, would lead them down the mountain. The ranger who tried to convince Dad to leave his cabin and come down from the mountains was a guy named Mark. He was the new partner the department assigned to Dad. Snow had already started falling in the mountains by September. Being an old hand, Dad had already stocked up for winter, planning to stay in the mountains until April. To pay for my grad school tuition, Dad was hoping the grateful brown bear that kept visiting, the one that brought him ginseng and rare mushrooms, would bring him something even more valuable. Outside, the wind howled, and snow kept thudding against the door. Dad eagerly opened the door, thinking the bear was back with another gift. But it was Mark standing there. Mark was younger and loved hearing Dad's stories about his adventures patrolling the forest. He was especially impressed by the story of Dad saving a massive mother brown bear from poachers. But today, his expression was strange. "Cole," he said, "I'm gonna be blunt, so don't get mad. What's on your mind? Come on in, let's have a drink first." Dad had spotted the bottle Mark was carrying and was already eager to invite him in. Mark glanced around nervously before rushing inside. "Cole, that bear isn't here to thank you. It's here to kill you. It's bringing its cubs so the little one can recognize its food source." Dad, who lived side by side with these wild animals, was really proud of the bear's supposed gratitude. He didn't like hearing this. "I saved that bear's life. Why would it want to eat me?" Mark got agitated, his voice rising. "You're giving these animals too much credit." He seemed to realize he'd lost his cool and wiped his face. "Cole, every time that bear brings you something, does it hug you? Does it drool? That's it sizing you up, seeing if you're ready to be eaten." Dad was a bit surprised because Mark had accurately described the grateful bear's behavior. And Dad hadn't told anyone those details about his interactions with the bear. Most people ran a mile if they saw that bear. Even Dad's old partner, Leo, wouldn't go near it. "You're just guessing." Dad frowned. "Mark, you're just being paranoid. If it was really sizing me up, why would it help me chop wood and do chores?" Mark's voice trembled. "It helps you with chores? Cole, you really can't stay. It might have already eaten someone. Otherwise, it wouldn't act so human-like. Around here, there's a saying that for an animal to become super intelligent, it either needs a special kind of luck, like gaining wisdom through good deeds, or it's eaten human flesh and stolen human intelligence. The latter kind can often even wear human skin and disguise themselves as people. Once they've tasted human flesh, other meat just doesn't cut it anymore." Mark must have thought of this, because he turned even paler. Dad just chuckled. "Nana's not like other animals. She knows how to repay kindness." But to get rid of Mark, he just brushed him off. "All right, I'll be careful. It's getting late, and it's not safe out. You should head back." Mark could tell Dad was just humoring him. He probably figured you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and sighed heavily, clearly annoyed. As he was leaving, as if he couldn't give up, he warned Dad again, "Cole, if you don't believe me, that little cub will definitely come looking for you tonight. It'll ask you for food, to test if you're wary of it." Dad didn't answer, clearly still skeptical. Mark left, dejected. That night, Dad heard a knock on the door. He thought he was dreaming and ignored it. Then he heard a window open and close. A blast of cold air rushed in, waking him completely. A round figure, about half his height, crawled in through the window. Dad was about to sit up and reach for the shotgun hanging on the wall. Just then, the figure moved closer to the stove. In the firelight, Dad saw it was the grateful bear's cub. Dad froze. He'd never taught a bear to open windows or doors, it had figured it out on its own. It just so happened that Dad had forgotten to lock the window from the inside that day, so the bear opened it easily. Dad immediately remembered what Mark had said and felt a jolt of fear. He stared at the little cub, his mind blank. Even as a cub, if it came to a fight, Dad wasn't sure he'd win. He remembered Mark's words, and a shiver of fear ran through him. He started to tremble. But the young bear, already as tall as a man when standing, just drooled and waddled over to Dad's bedside. It nudged Dad's face with its nose. The strong, musky smell of a wild animal filled the air. Dad couldn't pretend to be asleep anymore. "Hey there, Chubbs, what brings you here?" The bear dumped everything it was carrying onto Dad's bed. It was heavy. Right on top, Dad saw a 1,000-year-old ginseng root. Next to it were several pine cones, their seeds plump and full. And underneath, countless hazelnuts, mushrooms, and blueberries. All this for me? Dad looked astonished. He knew that in these heavily exploited mountains, even 100-year-old ginseng was rare, let alone a 1,000-year-old wild root that was clearly a treasure. He couldn't even imagine how much it would fetch at an apothecary in town. The bear panted, watching him. Once it saw Dad liked the gifts, it stuck out its wet, fishy-smelling tongue and licked Dad's face. It hurt a little, but Dad didn't dare move. As if reluctant to leave, the bear licked him again, then slowly climbed out the window, even standing up to pull the window shut with its paw. Its polite departure made Dad involuntarily recall how its mother, Nana, used to help him with chores. Nana, the mother bear, was pregnant when he rescued her. This was during the height of the anti-poaching crackdown. Our region in the Northeast was particularly active, and that's when Dad was issued his shotgun. Dad wasn't much of a shot, so he rarely used it. The only time was for Nana. Any pregnant animal is vulnerable, and Nana was no exception. The poachers had already calculated how much they'd make from her paws and hide when Dad fired a shot. The shot hit nothing but startled a flock of birds. His ranger status was intimidating enough. The poachers glanced at Dad's badge and reluctantly left. Dad went to check on the tranquilized bear and felt her belly, she was carrying a cub. So, out of pity, Dad brought the bear back to his cabin. At first, the bear was wary, but she couldn't resist the food Dad brought her from all over and was reluctant to leave. Soon, with Dad's dedicated care, she relaxed. Dad named her Nana and truly treated her like a pet, or maybe even a child. After Nana recovered from giving birth, she took her single cub back into the deep forest. Dad was sad to see her go, but he respected animal instincts. His old partner, Leo, had tried to comfort him. Animals aren't people. Expecting them to be humane or repay kindness is harder than climbing to heaven. Anyone who runs into a bear that big in the wild wouldn't even have time to play dead. It's better that it's gone. Dad had been angry at the time, thinking Leo was prejudiced against the bear. Later, when Nana returned with her cub and brought gifts, Dad specifically gave some to Leo, just to show him he'd been wrong. But Leo said nothing and didn't accept the gifts. He did, however, unusually stop trying to dissuade Dad. The next morning, Dad was jolted awake by urgent knocking. Mark was shouting, "Cole! Cole! Are you okay?" Dad threw on a jacket and opened the door. "What's up?" Mark visibly relaxed when he saw Dad was unharmed, then scratched his head sheepishly. "I was passing by this morning and saw bear tracks all over your yard. I got a little worried." The weather had cleared outside, and the fresh white snow was dazzling. Dad squinted to see. The ground around the base of his cabin walls was covered in bear tracks, thickest right under the window. Dad thought Mark was overreacting. He just shawed, yawned, and said nonchalantly, "Yeah, the little one came by yesterday." Mark's expression froze. Did it? Dad adjusted his clothes, cutting him off. But hey, the little fella brought me presents. See that 1,000-year-old ginseng? That's from him. Mark's eyes widened in surprise at the sight of the ginseng. He muttered, that can't be right. Then Mark looked Dad up and down. Dad looked lean, but under his clothes, he had the wiry muscles of a man who did hard labor. A look of realization dawned on Mark's face. It thinks you're not fat enough. It's worried there won't be enough to eat, so it's trying to fatten you up for winter. Dad was getting impatient but still tried to be patient. Mark, you can't keep treating me like an idiot. Mark's face flushed red with urgency, his voice rising. Cole, you have to believe me. What would I gain by harming you? Then, as if he'd seen something terrifying, Mark suddenly lowered his voice. Cole, can we talk inside? Dad was a bit surprised but stepped aside. As he closed the door, he casually glanced outside. Deep in the woods, the silhouettes of a large and a small brown bear were staring straight at them. Dad recognized them as Nana and her cub, Chubbs. He instinctively wanted to wave. But Mark was already trembling. And Dad, wondering if it was his imagination, thought Nana and Chubbs' eyes looked a bit fierce, not quite right. Before he could react, Mark pulled him into the room and slammed the door shut. Not only that, Mark deadbolted the door and carefully latched all the windows. The fire in the stove was banked with coal. Dad used the poker to stir the coals, and flames shot up, instantly warming the room. Dad added another shovel of coal. Thinking about it, a chill ran down his own spine. Mark said, Cole, you saw them, right? Those two bears were watching us like prey. Dad remained silent. But in his heart, he agreed. Nana's fierce gaze was unsettlingly unfamiliar. In the silence, Mark suddenly seemed to remember something. Why were most of the cubs' tracks under the window? Dad then remembered the strangeness of last night and told Mark about seeing the bear open and close the window. For the first time, Mark looked at Dad with suspicion. He walked over to the window and, sure enough, saw several dried bear paw prints on the table beside it. Mark's face grew grimmer. He checked the other windows, and Dad, curious, followed. They found bear paw prints all the way around the cabin. Mark told Dad gravely, it's marking its territory. It's treating you like livestock it's raising. Like chickens or pigs, penned up, being fattened for slaughter. And it can open windows, it's even more human-like than I thought. Mark's voice grew softer, his eyes wide with a terror that was almost palpable. I suspect, Leo was eaten by it too. Dad was stunned. But didn't Leo retire? Mark looked puzzled. Leo? He's been missing for 5 or 6 years, hasn't he? Weren't you the one who called the Forestry Service about it? Didn't Leo just retire 2 months ago? Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. He started to remember some things. Leo was indeed supposed to retire 5 years ago. But he suddenly disappeared just days before he was due to leave. Dad had reported it to the Forestry Service. But 2 days later, Leo reappeared, saying he was still hale and hearty and wanted to work a couple more years. He even said he'd already cleared it with the Forestry Service, so Dad didn't think any more of it. Not only that, but this Leo was much stronger, able to handle most of the work by himself. Dad, even in his prime, felt outdone. Besides that, this Leo kept asking Dad when he was going down the mountain, saying he wanted to go with him. Dad always found the process of requesting leave to go downhill too troublesome and would politely refuse, saying, maybe someday. That someday never came. Not long ago, Leo went down the mountain by himself. That's when the department sent Mark to take over his duties. After a long pause, Dad's voice trembled. If Leo's been missing for 5 or 6 years, then who was I working with all these years? And who called the Forestry Service? Now Dad was truly scared. Mark, his face pale, said, Leo was most likely eaten. The Leo you worked with, was the bear, wearing Leo's skin. Both of them looked at each other in terror. Suddenly, there was a loud banging at the door. The sound was urgent, heavy. Open up, Cole. It was Leo's voice. Dad instinctively reached for the doorknob, then froze. He remembered, Leo was forgetful and liked to pull rank as an elder, always calling him kiddo, or young Cole, not by his full name. When Dad didn't answer, the Leo outside seemed to get impatient. Cole. Nana sent me. You trust Nana, don't you? Mark gripped Dad's arm tightly, shaking his head and whispering, Leo's dead. He's already dead. A bear's howl came from outside, followed by Leo's cheerful voice, Chubbs, you're here. Quick, tell Cole to let me in, I'm freezing out here. With Chubbs joining in, the old wooden door was clearly taking a beating, creaking and groaning. Inside, both men were sweating bullets. Dad made up his mind. He whispered to Mark, I have a shotgun in my room. No matter what, I'll protect you. Just follow my lead. Let me see if it's really Leo first. Dad opened the door. Standing outside were a man and a bear, Leo and Chubbs. Leo was wearing a heavy army coat. The moment he saw Dad, his eyes welled up with tears. Cole, my boy. If it weren't for Nana, I wouldn't have known poachers were back on the mountain. I rushed right over to find you. As rangers, they hated poaching and illegal logging more than anything. Dad's blood boiled, and he forgot everything else. Who is it? I'll go deal with that son of a bitch right now. Leo hesitated, as if trying hard to remember. Finally, he said, when I was down the mountain, I saw a wanted poster. I think his name was, Mark Lynn. He's pretending to be a new ranger, telling everyone wild animals are eating people. He tricked several rangers into leaving the mountain, then he's been poaching up here, making a killing. When Leo finished, Dad froze. He turned his head to look at the man inside the room. Mark's youthful, ruddy face glowed in the firelight from the small stove, looking almost oily. Though he looked flustered, his eyes were dark and heavy. His eyes didn't move, like a somber wax figure. He didn't seem genuinely panicked. Seeing Dad look at him, he shook his head and explained, Cole, Leo's been eaten. You can't believe what he's saying. Only then did Leo notice Mark's presence. He immediately charged into the room to attack him. The two of them instantly started brawling. Dad looked at Chubbs, still standing outside, and boldly waved for it to leave. Surprisingly, Chubbs glanced inside, then obediently nodded and left. Dad closed the door. The commotion behind him died down. Leo was choking Mark, whose face was turning purple. Mark was struggling to gasp for help. Dad pulled them apart. Even though they were separated, the tension was still thick. Mark hid behind Dad, whispering, how could you let that thing in? Leo heard him clearly and, red-faced with anger, retorted, people believe in science these days. Don't think you can fool us with some made-up story. Dad's head was aching from their arguing. He had to intervene. I'm calling the Forestry Service. We'll see which one of you is telling the truth. They both agreed. But when Dad tried to make the call, he was dumbfounded. There was no signal. The call would ring twice and then automatically disconnect. No signal in the mountains. There had been heavy blizzards the past 2 days. The snow probably brought down the signal tower. Both men, each looking confident, watched Dad with eager, expectant expressions. Dad realized one of them was confident because he was telling the truth, and the other was confident because he knew the tower was down and the call wouldn't go through. Dad tried not to look alarmed and said calmly, no signal. Both men looked surprised. Mark was the first to grab Dad's arm. You have to believe me, Cole. I'll go with you to fix the signal tower. Leo snorted. Who knows if you're just trying to get Cole alone to kill him? I'm an old man, I wouldn't be able to stop you. Dad was in a bind, unsure what to do. Mark gritted his teeth. Cole, you be careful. I'll go fix the signal tower myself. With that, Mark slammed the door and left. Dad wanted to stop him. Fresh snow had fallen, and it was hard to tell how deep it was. Someone could easily fall into a drift and suffocate. But Leo stopped him. He's a poacher. If he dies, he deserves it. As Leo said this, a flash of crimson glinted in his eyes. Dad was startled, but Leo quickly looked normal again, though his eyes remained cold and menacing. And Mark was gone. Dad hesitated. Leo, if he really is a poacher, we should take him to the police. With this blizzard, if something happens to him, I'll feel responsible. Leo was completely unconcerned. What could happen? He didn't hesitate when he shot at your Nana. Dad cherished Nana like the apple of his eye. He immediately asked, "Is Nana okay?" Leo said irritably, "She took a bullet in the leg. When she came to me, she was bleeding all over the place. It hurt just looking at it." Dad immediately started to get dressed to go out. "Where's Nana? I have to see her. If she's injured and not treated, she won't survive." Leo grabbed Dad's arm, his tone softening. "She's fine. Don't I know you? I've already treated Nana. She's resting now." Dad relaxed a bit, but then he noticed that Leo's grip on his arm was like an iron clamp he couldn't break free. So Dad had no choice but to sit down. Trying to make small talk, he said, "It's strange though, Nana and Chubbs haven't hibernated yet this year." Leo yawned. "Bears only hibernate when there's no food. If there's plenty to eat, they don't need to." As he finished speaking, with Dad watching, Leo started to drool. It wasn't like human drooling at all. A small puddle quickly formed on the floor beneath Leo. Meeting Dad's terrified gaze, Leo calmly closed his mouth. "Cole, you got anything to eat around here? I've been rushing up the mountain since before dawn, haven't eaten a thing." Though those were his words, his eyes never left Dad. Dad then noticed that Leo was limping, and a patch on his thick cotton pants was wet, clearly from bleeding. Leo, was Nana? Now, Dad completely believed everything Mark had said. Cold sweat broke out all over him. He couldn't even think about answering Leo. Just as Leo opened his mouth, Dad grabbed the fire poker from the top of the stove and lunged at Leo's mouth with it. The iron poker was red hot from the fire, even the handle was scorching. There was a sizzling sound, followed by the smell of roasting flesh. Leo swatted Dad's weapon away. Dad lost his grip, and the poker flew across the room, hitting the wall with enough force to embed itself there. Leo let out a few strange cries. They were bear roars, a sound Dad knew all too well. If Dad had been any less composed, he probably would have wet himself right there. Fortunately, Leo had loosened his grip on Dad, who quickly darted to the door. He didn't care about anything else now. He seized the chance, threw open the door, and ran. But he hadn't expected Chubbs to still be there. Chubbs must have returned after Dad closed the door, lying in wait silently by the entrance, awaiting further instructions from Nana, who was wearing Leo's skin. Now it was blocking Dad's way. A bear roar came from inside the cabin. This roar must have conveyed some message, because Chubbs instantly bared its teeth, clearly ready to attack. Danger probably unlocks hidden potential. Dad quickly slammed the cabin door shut and bolted it, preventing Nana from rushing out. He ran towards the coal pile in the yard. He ended up sacrificing an arm, taking a bite, to get a chance to grab the coal shovel. Before Nana could climb out the window, he smacked Chubbs hard on the head twice with the shovel. Chubbs yelped in pain and loosened its grip. Dad seized the opportunity, ran out of the yard, and bolted the yard gate behind him. Even if the bears could climb the fence, it would take time, giving Dad a head start. The cold mountain air seared his lungs, feeling like it would freeze inside him. Dad stumbled through the snow, falling countless times, his mind going numb from the cold. But he didn't dare stop. The sound of bear roars was right behind him. He only breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the signal tower. He could taste blood in his throat, and if he stopped, he'd start coughing uncontrollably. The mountain's only signal tower had indeed fallen. The break point was a little higher than Dad's head. When it was built, they'd specifically considered the harsh mountain climate and used reinforced concrete, making it super durable and strong. But now, the tower looked like it had been repeatedly battered by something huge and snapped clean off. There were massive claw marks on it, one set large, one small. Dad knew at a glance it was the work of those two brown bears, Nana and Chubbs. Mark wasn't at the base of the tower. By now, Dad's feet were numb with cold. Mark's cabin wasn't far from the signal tower. But Dad couldn't walk another step. The roars were getting closer, but Dad couldn't get up. He could only sit there helplessly, his legs useless. In this desperate situation, Dad was filled with regret, almost resigned to becoming bear food. Then, unexpectedly, with the crunching sound of footsteps on snow, Mark appeared. He was carrying a toolbox, apparently genuinely intending to fix the tower. He looked surprised when he saw Dad. Cole. Dad, a 6-foot-tall man, couldn't hold back his tears the moment he saw Mark. The cold wind stung his face. He remembered the feeling when Chubbs licked him. It was a similar stinging pain. He used to think it was Chubbs being friendly, but now he realized it was the cub testing its food. A wave of delayed fear washed over him. Dad desperately tried to control his sobs, but the prolonged cold made his lips tremble uncontrollably when he tried to speak. His words came out shaky and faint, bears, bears, run, quick. The moment Dad finished, Mark's face also turned pale. He could see Dad had no strength left to talk. Mark asked, "My cabin? Can you make it?" Dad nodded with difficulty. Mark looked around. Seeing no sign of the bears, he dropped the toolbox and immediately hoisted Dad onto his back, heading for his own cabin. They had just locked the door and windows when, before they could even catch their breath, a massive crash against the door made them both jump. The banging grew heavier with each thud. The door looked like it could burst open any second. Dad and Mark quickly dragged heavy furniture to barricade it. Whatever was outside probably realized it was no use and stopped wasting its energy. The next moment, a huge bear paw appeared at the window. With a violent swipe, the glass shattered, and icy wind poured in. In that instant, their hearts leaped into their throats. The old-fashioned window design, common in the Northeast, proved its worth. The iron window frame was sturdy, and the panes it divided were too small for a bear, or even a person, to fit through. Especially not for Nana, who was clearly a fully grown, massive bear. Nana's arm reached in through the broken window, sweeping at everything it could touch. After a flurry of crashing sounds, the paw slowly fumbled for the window latch. Mark quickly grabbed the shotgun Leo had left behind. He was young and clearly inexperienced with guns, missing several times, but just in the nick of time, before Nana could open the window, he managed to hit her arm. Nana let out a pained roar. Mark seemed to get the hang of it and fired a few more times. Nana took 2 more hits and retreated, clearly frustrated. Dad had deep feelings for Nana and couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow seeing her injured. But then he remembered that she and her cub wanted to eat him, and he suppressed his concern. Mark took out some old newspapers and pasted them over the broken window. After 3 or 4 layers, it barely kept the wind out, and the temperature in the cabin slowly began to rise. They pushed a tall, heavy wardrobe in front of the window, completely blocking it, plunging Mark's small cabin into darkness like night. As Dad's frozen body gradually thawed, the fear and helplessness surged back. Belated regret washed over him, regret for his blind trust in wild animals, and regret for his greed for those mountain delicacies. He had once caused Leo's death, and now he had almost gotten himself killed. But it was too late for regrets. At Mark's prompting, Dad recounted his narrow escape after Mark had left. Finally, he confessed to Mark, "I misunderstood you before. You're a good kid." Mark, with a complicated expression, also apologized. "It's my fault. I got angry and stormed out to fix the signal tower. Otherwise, Cole, you wouldn't have been in such danger." Both their hearts were pounding. There were 2 bears in total. Nana was badly injured and probably wouldn't come back. But her cub had only been hit once and was still capable of fighting. If they wanted to live, they had to run. Mark suggested to Dad again, "Cole, you can't stay in these mountains. You need to run." "What about you?" Dad's eyes flickered with hesitation. "And what if I run into them on my way down?" Mark sighed. "That mother bear and her cub are obsessed with you. I can climb trees, I can play dead. If I run into them, I have a better chance of escaping than you do. But if you don't leave now, you'll be in real danger." Mark spoke earnestly. Dad was indeed terrified. After a brief rest, he took the map of a shortcut down the mountain that Mark gave him and set off to get help from town. But he got lost. He wandered in circles and ended up back where he started. This time, he wanted to take Mark with him directly. With Mark leading the way, he believed their chances of survival would be much higher. But then, he stumbled upon an unbelievable sight. In Mark's yard, Nana was sitting on the ground with her back to Dad. And Mark, who had previously shown such extreme fear of the bear, was now sitting comfortably, face to face with her. Mark was saying, "Are you sure you won't consider it?" Nana made a very human-like sound, like the raspy voice of a very old woman. "Not considering it." Mark sounded perplexed, his tone urgent. "Why not? So what if one Cole got away? I can bring you more humans in the future. Just show me where you find all those valuable things. You want to eat people, right? I can get you as many as you want. You think that idiot Cole was the only one who could bring you victims? I can do much better." Nana remained unmoved, her strange, womanly voice repeating, "Not considering it." Dad finally understood. Mark had deliberately sent him away to try and strike a deal with Nana. A bear's sense of smell and hearing are far superior to a human's. By the time Dad had heard enough and tried to slip away, it was too late. Nana turned her head and stared intently at the pine tree where Dad was hiding. Saliva dripped uncontrollably from her mouth, her eyes glowing green, like a starving creature spotting a delicious meal. Mark noticed Nana's reaction. Then he must have spotted a corner of Dad's clothing, because a look of realization crossed his face. "Cole," he said, "you heard everything. Why are you still hiding?" Dad wanted to bolt, but he didn't have the stamina to outrun the bear now. Both the man and the bear could understand human speech. Dad hesitated for a moment, then decided to face them directly. Dad wanted to confront them, but he knew he was already in a precarious position. Mark, having failed to get Nana's agreement, dropped his pretense with Dad. Annoyed, he said, "Cole, I was trying to let you get away. Why did you come back?" Dad, who had been acting timidly in front of him, gave a cold laugh. "If I hadn't come back, I never would have known you were plotting something so big behind my back." Then Dad gave an order, "Nana, get him." Mark scoffed. "I wasn't lying when I said it wants to eat you. You actually think you can still command it?" He quickly paid the price for his scorn. Nana lunged, knocking Mark to the ground, and tore a large chunk of flesh from his shoulder with one bite. Another shadow emerged from the surrounding woods, it was Chubbs. At a signal from Nana, Chubbs snorted and began to feed on Mark's flesh from the wound Nana had opened. Mark's scream startled a flock of birds from the forest. Nana walked over and nuzzled Dad's cheek, as docile as a pet. Brown bear fur is actually quite coarse. It pricked Dad's face, making it itch and sting. Dad stroked Nana's fur and said to Mark, "I didn't want to kill you, but my Nana and Chubbs are so hungry. They've taken a liking to your flesh. There's nothing I can do." Dad put on a regretful expression, his eyes full of affection as he looked at Nana. But Mark could no longer respond. He couldn't even scream anymore. He died never knowing why he ended up as the emergency food supply for Nana and her cub. Actually, Dad had known for a long time that Nana was no ordinary brown bear. She understood gratitude, but she also craved human flesh. The biggest difference between a wild animal and a human is that its animal nature clearly overrides its reason. The meat of two-legged creatures was too fragrant. She would pounce on Dad, drooling, licking him while seeming to apologize. To save his own life, Dad volunteered to be her lure, bringing other people for her and her cub to eat. More and more rangers disappeared. Leo was the last one. Mark was this year's offering. Dad had known for a while that the higher-ups suspected him and were sending someone to investigate the mystery of the missing rangers. To fool the department, complete his mission, and save his own skin, he chose to stage a narrow escape from a bear attack. With Nana and her cub, he would be honorably injured while protecting a colleague, and the vicious mother bear and cub would flee far away to the Siberian mountains. That way, all three of them could survive. Nana and Chubbs, having had their fill of the final offering, thanked Dad and left. Dad collapsed on a path frequented by loggers and was carried down the mountain for medical treatment. After recovering, he resigned from his job as a park ranger. The department approved his resignation and gave him a generous compensation package. "Lily, come up the mountain with me. I still have a lot of things I didn't bring down. Nana's ginseng is still up there, you know," Dad said to me after he recovered and was discharged from the hospital. I was tired of the stories Dad told me. I didn't want to hear the old man's rambling and boasting anymore. Besides humans, how could there be animals that clever and cunning in this world? But he insisted on going back one more time to get the ginseng and his work journals from all those years. I couldn't refuse him, so we set off on a clear day. The mountain road was rough. By the time we were close to the cabin, it was already getting dark. Seeing the cabin, Dad seemed very happy. I thought he was happy to finally be done with his work up there, but his happiness didn't seem to be about that. He was acting strangely, a bit stiff. The moment I turned back to look at him, a strange crimson glint seemed to flash in his eyes. "Lily," he asked, "are humans really the only intelligent animals in this world?"